For those of you who are, if we're live, welcome everyone to our weekly book club.
Yeah, it is. It's so good. We're starting on time this week. Assuming
Barely.
have you guys got confirmation that we're rolling?
I don't yet. I'm just Yes, we are rolling. We're good.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, welcome everyone. This is week 4, I believe.
Welcome everyone.
Is it 4?
Is it week 4 to our weekly book club?
I think it's week 4.
Good.
We are on chapters 10, 11, and 12 this week. This is the STR book club where we're going through tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And I see that we already got some people in the chat. Oh,
Hey,
my
your
wife's
wife there.
watching. That's pretty nice. And my daughter. How
and
sweet.
Danielle's on. Woo! We got some STR faithful.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
We probably already know about the book.
Yeah, but you know what? I've read this book probably, this might be my 3rd or 4th time going through. I'm getting a lot out of this study, and I hope that others who are tuning in, just to be able to talk to you guys about it and bounce ideas off you both, and just talk about how you've used some of these tactics in your everyday work is really cool. So thanks for doing this, and we got 2 more weeks I think after this, and then because I think we're going to do a 6-week study.
Yeah.
And hi Laura, and then I think the plan is to have Greg has agreed to come on with us.
Wait, Greg
Koukl? Wait. Greg Koukl?
Greg Koukl?
Can you believe it?
Oh my gosh.
Hey Ryan. So yeah, people are jumping in here. Yeah, we'll have Greg, and Greg will take questions from the field, and it'll be a whole lot of fun. So looking forward to that. So how about we jump into this, unless you guys have something you want to add before we get rolling?
No, I second your sentiment though about the fact that even though like I've been with STR for 15 years and been teaching this for just about that long, and yeah, reading it again has been really helpful, and it's brought me some new insights, and Greg's just got a way of putting things that I think is really very helpful. So
yeah,
but yeah, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Sweet. Okay, so we're gonna do chapters 10, 11, and 12, and we'll just go around the table, so to speak. Chapter 10 is titled "Suicide: Views That Self-Destruct," and this is Alan and I were just chatting before we jumped on here a second ago about this, because this idea, this concept, when we first heard of it, it was like, whoa, this was earth-shattering. In fact, I was telling Alan that the first time I heard someone say, to instruct me, if someone says there is no truth, you should ask them the question, is that true? I thought this was some kind of Jedi mind trick, okay? Like, whoa, how did you do that, right? Now we're so used to this stuff, we teach through it. It's kind of lost that, I don't know what the word is. It's lost the gravitas. It's lost the excitement, maybe. But as we're, going through, this really is an amazing technique, and it turns out a lot of the philosophies that undergird the culture are self-refuting, either in kind of the suicidal way or sibling rivalry or something like that we'll talk about. So let's get into it. Maybe I'll start with you, John. As far as the suicide tactic, is there a certain example or situation or maybe just something from the text itself that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I would say that this is probably, other than, the formal Columbo stuff, this is probably the tactic I use the most. Especially in today's cultural climate where relativism seems to rule the day. And it doesn't really matter what we're talking about, whether it be moral relativism, religious pluralism, stuff like that. It's just good to know. I use it, so it's easy for me because I say it's easy for me because most of the people that I grew up with aren't believers. None of my family are believers. A lot of my friends that I hang out with aren't believers. So I get the opportunity to do this all the time. And so I got the chance to practice it. But it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week, where you also do need a certain base of knowledge to talk about this one. Because when somebody brings something up, you need to be good listeners. Listen to what people are saying and ask good questions, asking clarifying questions, so that they can number one, you understand their view, and then you ask that what's that like this. I don't want to say suicide. I don't like the title of the chapter.
Yeah, I wonder.
Why is that, John?
Well, because I've been talking a lot on suicide lately, and so it's just like it's really hard to because I don't want to say the title. I don't want to say you got to know this suicide question, or show them that they're committing suicide. But I understand why Greg called it suicide, and I understand why he titled chapter 11 the same, similar, practical suicide. But it's good to know this tactic and just point it out, especially in moral relativism, or like you were saying, people when they want to deny the existence of truth, it right off the bat. Just ask them, like you said, that question. Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
And then I love seeing the wheels start to crank. It's like they were stalled, and all of a sudden it just broke through. It's like you sprayed a gallon of WD-40 on their clogged up, rusted mind, and it works.
Yeah.
So that's just an overview. Now, to be honest with you, I really liked the chapter, and one of the reasons why I really liked it is because I think it was only like 6 pages long. So I flew. How long is it? Oh, I guess it's a little bit longer than I remembered, but it's just so well written that it just seemed like it went so quickly. But yeah, all the things that Greg included, the bullet points are fantastic because they're things people say all the time. There are no absolutes.
Yeah.
And well, is that an absolute? Are you absolutely sure there are no absolutes? So anyways, that's what I took from it. Kind of general, nothing mind-blowing, guys. Sorry.
No, but
I think I'll take my C+ and be happy with it because I'm okay with average.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah, maybe it was a C- actually, but
no. At least there's room for improvement.
I'm kidding. No. I think you bring up a good point, which is that this chapter is super helpful, and the tactic of suicide is so helpful because our culture is so steeped in relativism, and since relativism is inherently self-refuting, it's highly likely that you're going to run across people and their statements that express some form of relativism, which is self-defeating and commit suicide. So, yeah, I think you're right about that point. I've often thought, and in fact, I think I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago called "2 Tactics to Rule Them All." And it's a play off on Lord of the Rings. But I often say, if you know the suicide tactic, and if you know taking the roof off, like the vast majority of the objections that you're going to run across that are false, usually can be undermined with one of those 2 tactics, like a huge number of them. And so that's why I say, if you just knew those 2 tactics, which we're going to get into taking the roof off next week.
Yeah,
I think it's more of a favorite of mine than even the suicide tactic. Then, man, you'll have the tools available to you to make massive amounts of progress. So I think it's cool. The one thing that stood out to me that I really enjoyed was on page 149, where he brings up the objection that God can't make a rock so big he can't lift, or he brings up that. I love the fact. I thought this was a really great observation.
Yeah.
That Greg points out that when someone raises this objection, the problem with the objection is that they're presuming that God is 2 beings instead of 1.
Yeah.
Because when you say something is stronger than, or he made something that you can't lift, it presumes 2 people are there. And so the objection presumes there's 2 beings when in reality there's 1, which is why it makes why it doesn't make sense. It's just an incoherent question or challenge in the first place. So to me, that was like my favorite point that he made in that whole chapter. And it's just a nice way to understand and explain to someone who raises the objection, because you hear the objection a lot. So.
Yeah, that one does come up a lot. And so do you think it's appropriate to ask the question, or to show that it's parallel to something like, well, can you beat yourself in an arm wrestle? You know what I'm saying? Like the question assumes, like it makes it seem like there's two beings and they're both powerful, and does one have more power than the other, right? And so can you beat yourself in an arm wrestle? There's two of you, and you're going to now have a showdown with the,
Alan had enough. He had enough of us.
That's all right. We'll wait for him to come back. I'll have a few comments. So this idea of suicide, and I'm with you, John. I actually don't like the name of it, especially in light of the culture right now, who's very sensitive to that word. Here's Alan coming back. We need to be careful, I think, on using vocabulary that isn't necessarily going to trigger someone. So I know that Frank Turek he calls it the Roadrunner Tactic, right? Yeah. The idea that, the Roadrunner and coyote, and the coyote ends up being out in the middle of, runs off the cliff. And there's a moment where he's standing in midair, right? And then he realizes he's staying in midair, and that's when he falls. And so Frank calls it the Roadrunner Tactic, probably more sensitive to what's going on. You do speak on suicide, so this is a hard issue. And so just saying the word, we all know people who have committed suicide, or
to be clear, I don't think it's going to trigger somebody to go and commit suicide.
No. But
I think that
it immediately.
I think we could offer a little bit more. Just you save certain terms for certain situations.
But
whatever. I mean, it's also the chapter's been around. This is an older chapter. It's not new.
Yeah, that's right.
I was just going to quickly ask you guys because I've run across probably almost half a dozen people, maybe a little bit more, who have said to me, have you guys ever considered renaming that tactic? Because they just find it kind of disturbing to name a tactic after that. Yeah. Have you guys run across that or not?
Well, you know what? In my own teaching, I don't actually call it the suicide tactic.
Oh, you don't?
No, I don't.
What do you call it?
Well, I just talk about self-refuting claims.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't call it a tactic. I just say this is a lot of claims out there. A lot of philosophies are self-refuting. So relativism is self-refuting. You can ask the question, is that true, that there is no truth? Scientism, that's a huge philosophy, dominated. Many people have the impression that the only way you can know anything is through the five senses, or through science.
Yeah.
And that itself, that claim, isn't known through the five senses.
Sure.
That's a philosophical claim, not a scientific claim. Therefore, at least there's one thing that doesn't fit under the category of science that we know, and so there it's self-refuting.
That's one of the beauties about like everything we're talking about over these last few weeks, but especially it just comes every time we start talking. It just comes out the simplicity of these things. It's they're really powerful arguments. They're super simple, but it's like when you learn to listen to what people say and take them seriously, and then hold them to the same standard that you're listening to them by, meaning I'm going to take my time and I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to give to you my attention. And then you can say, wait a second, but didn't you just say you've been talking for 40 minutes and didn't you start off by telling me there's no such thing as truth? Then what have you been saying for the last 40 minutes? Can we ask about that? I had my brother once caught in this we always talk about morals and something to do with morals. He thought they were relative or whatever. And it was and maybe you guys could lend me some advice on how to deal with this. At the end of the conversation, he knew I had him. I said, Dan, you're being logically inconsistent. Like, it's important to be consistent. And he looked at me, he's like, I'm okay with inconsistencies in my worldview. I don't really care. And then like he just like walked away. And I just sit there like, oh, well, I don't really have anything to say to you anymore. I
You need to consider Hinduism.
So what you, I mean, how do you respond to someone like that? I may have asked, and this might have been a little sarcastic, but you know, if it's a brother or someone close to you, you could say something like, "Oh, so then you do care about logical inconsistencies?" And he'd say, "No, you misunderstood me. I said I don't care." "Oh, so you do care?" You know, he can't go 5 minutes without using the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't survive that way.
I actually, you know what I think I said to him is I said, Dan, I think that's disgusting. And he looked at me, he's like, what? That I said, Dan, I think it's gross that you like to kill puppies. I think it's inhumane, and I'm really disappointed in you, and I'm gonna have to call the authorities. And he like looked at me all like, what are you talking about? Like, well, that's what you just said. You know, you don't care about consistencies in your worldview, so you kill puppies. It was anyways.
Yeah.
Man. But the simplicity of these things and just getting a grasp of them and listening to what people say, you know, it's just so cool that we can that these tools are available to us, you know, and luckily our worldview is pretty consistent.
Yeah.
You know,
and these tools, and this goes to what Ashton's talking about. These tools are used to persuade the mind. They're not going to persuade the heart necessarily, right? And that's a separate issue. So he just raised the point that it sounds like it's a heart issue with your brother.
Suppressing the truth and unrighteousness.
Sure.
You know,
and that becomes real clear when they say, I don't care if I'm inconsistent,
yeah,
or I don't care if I'm being illogical. But this is what I love about these 3 chapters we're going through, is that they trade on a very simple notion called the law of non-contradiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't have A and not A at the same time and in the same sense. But that's what ends up happening when someone says there is no truth, right? Because they think that claim is true. So they're saying there is truth, there isn't truth. And all you're doing is pointing out with a question that they're being inconsistent, that their worldview is contradictory. And so we said, look at relativism. Again, this is why it's such a great tactic. Relativism, self-refuting, self-defeating. Scientism, self-refuting, self-defeating. Religious pluralism, right? And I don't know if you guys speak on religious pluralism. I think you guys do, right? Mm-hmm. And my go-to is to ask the question, well, because religious pluralism teaches that all religions are true, right? And so you can we've talked about this in a previous session. You can ask, what do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion? But at the end of the day, I think you want to find out, how can it possibly be true? And Greg, I think, points this out, that they're all true when Christianity is making specific claims about, say, Jesus' resurrection, and
mm-hmm.
other religions don't agree with that claim, right? They would make the opposite claim. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Well, he can't rise from the dead and not rise from the dead. So which is it? They can't, you can show there, they can't all be true. Okay, so
that's true.
That's true. So we covered first chapter 10, just kind of introduces self-defeating claims.
Right.
But let's go to chapter 11. It gets a little bit more fun, I think, when you get to what he calls practical suicide. And these ones aren't the same as in chapter 10, because chapter 10, there's something logically contradictory in the proposition itself, in the claim itself, right? And you can expose that with a question. Chapter 11 is talking about claims that we can't, it calls it practical, because you can't live them. You make a claim, but you end up violating your own standard, your own claim in how you live, or how you're behaving.
Yeah.
And so, do you guys want to give some examples, or talk about when you've used this, or just talk about something you liked in the chapter?
I've actually been thinking about this one a lot recently because I've just been doing a lot of, I guess, reflection in the time that we have. And do you guys remember when people used to tell you not to force your religion or your worldview? Don't force your religion on me.
Yeah.
And people have stopped saying that. To me, at least, they have. Maybe because I've been matured and I'm not, a jerk for Jesus anymore. But I think it's because the cultural tide has kind of shifted. The pendulum is on the other side, and now it's okay to force your views on other people. And that really hit home for me on page 163, where Greg was talking about the Southern Baptist Convention.
Right. Yep.
And they made it public that their plans were to evangelize Jews. And there was like this whole, it's like huge controversy because of it. Like,
right.
How dare you? How dare you put it out there that you were going to try to talk to somebody about what you think is true? And then I thought Greg just did a great job of exploring that issue specifically, but overall, the idea of don't force your morals on me. Well, why are you trying to force your moral on me that it's not okay for me to force my morals on you? Right. And he just does. And once you learn this stuff, it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, Tim. It's kind of like a game changer a little bit. It maybe, for me at least, made me a little bit more bold, a little bit more. I was a little bit more willing to kind of step out there because so much of what people say, practically speaking, falls into this category. I mean, so much. So it just popped out because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I haven't heard that. Don't force your morals on me. And mainly, I think it's because society has kind of swung. I mean, this is a totally different discussion. But I think it's kind of swung in the last 10 years to the other side where now it's okay to kind of force your morals because we don't necessarily have the majority voice. But off topic.
Yeah, no, actually, I was going to mention the same example I had my own example, but the same point that he brings up on page 163 and 164, because that same thing happened to me when I was in physical therapy school back in 1990. It was either 1995 or 1996. I can't remember which year I did it, but I was in physical therapy school. I think that year, the summer off. And so I was planning to go on a short-term missions trip with my church to Kazakhstan for 3 weeks, just one of those short-term mission trips, And I remember I had to raise money for it. So I was in my, before the summer came, we had some classes that came right up into the beginning of summer. And I remember going to some of my classmates who were Christians and just saying, hey, would you be willing to support, my short-term missions trip, whatever. And so, of course, some of the non-believing students of the class heard me, and they said the exact thing. They said, how come you're going to go to another country, Kazakhstan, and try to change other people's religious beliefs? It's wrong to change other people's religious beliefs. Now, at the time, I hadn't met Greg or heard of STR at the time, and I hadn't studied any apologetic. Well, I had studied apologetics, but not this kind of stuff yet. So even though that was an example of practical suicide, I didn't know how to respond. For the most part, kind of a new believer, and so I was just kind of getting my feet wet in Christianity, let alone apologetics. So, anyways, I just thought, as soon as I read that story on 163 and 164, that was immediately popped into my head because it happened to me. But I just didn't have the tools at the time to respond to it, And I think, one of the points that we've already made is that suicide is in Practical Suicide and the next chapter. These are hard things to recognize. And it's only through practice and reading them and listening to them in conversations and then reflecting on them, you start to identify them. And then the reason why you are able to then identify them in the midst of an actual conversation and not some later time is because you've already recognized them in the past and you're just seeing them come up again.
Yeah.
And then eventually when you get good at it, you can begin to see them on the spot. Heard of them.
Yeah.
Is that mine or yours?
It was mine.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyways, that was the thing that kind of popped in my head. Oh, the other example I wanted to give though is this. I was so for many years, and occasionally still, I joined Justice for All, which is Steve Wagner, who's the executive director of Justice for All. He used to be a speaker for Stand to Reason.
Yeah.
So we became good friends when he was working for Stand to Reason. He's now the executive director of Justice for All, and they are a pro-life organization that kind of got their name by doing these abortion protests on university campuses. And so they would set up these massive billboard-sized images, graphic images of aborted babies, and they'll put these, this like fence around it so people wouldn't like trash it. And they put it like right in the middle of a campus, a secular campus. And of course, people would get outraged and upset and angry and so on and so forth. So I would oftentimes, if they're anywhere near where I lived, I would drive over to that place and participate in the protest. Okay. So now think about it for a moment. This is a protest occurring on a campus. Okay. Now there was always these counter protests, but one particular sign this guy brought up, and the sign had the word poop, P-O-O-P, and it stood for protesters opposed to on-campus protests. So they're literally like protesting on-campus protests, but they are on the campus protesting, so they're protesting the very thing that they're protesting. So it was just an example of practical suicide.
I'll share one example that happened to me not too long ago. I was at an event in Texas and speaking on truth, which, by the way, can be one of the most controversial things you can talk about. I mean, I've given talks on truth and had people walk out of my session. This happened locally. It also happened this time in Texas. I was talking about truth and how is the difference between subjective and objective truth. And I had used the story of Rachel Dolezal. Maybe you heard of her. She was one of the chapter presidents of the NAACP. And turns out she isn't Black.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
she like dyes her skin and changes her hair. But she is whiter than I am. Okay. And her parents are Caucasian. And anyways, I showed a video where she's asked on like NBC or something, "Are you Black?" And she says, "Yes." and then I showed a thing of this guy, Emil, who's in the Netherlands, and he tried to get his age adjusted from 69 to 49 because he doesn't feel like he's 69. He feels like he's 49. In fact, the doctors say he's in good shape for his age. And anyway, so I show these clips, and people got up because they saw, and I didn't make this connection, they saw a connection to the transgender issue.
Yeah.
I didn't mention the transgender issue. Okay, I didn't say anything about it. Anyways, they got online, and these guys started like attacking the church, giving bad reviews. They didn't even go to they were just getting the mob to go to the church and give bad reviews on the website. And then they were trying to bully me. In fact, I screenshotted. One guy said, "Let's go to Tim Barnett's Instagram account and cyber bully him." That was the exact words. Real tolerant. Okay, real tolerant. Anyways, they show up on my Instagram, and I went back and forth with a couple of them. And one of them were like saying essentially that I was judging. I was judging people, and that it was wrong for me to judge. And of course, this is practical suicide, right? I don't think I was actually judging in that moment. That's not what the talk was about. But they assumed, and of course, they were judging me. That's the whole reason they came to my Instagram and started following me. And so here was an example of someone judging me for judging, or what they thought I was judging.
Right.
So this is the inconsistency. They couldn't see it. I tried to point it out. And this actually goes to, I saw Victor had a question here. No, not this one. This one here. What are your thoughts on talking to people who don't care about their views or actions being self-refuting? They don't want logic or truth. they go by their feelings. This is what happened to me. What do you guys, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's also what John was just sharing too, right? With your brother.
Yeah.
He's like, he was okay with inconsistency.
That's
Yeah.
what he said. But that's kind of the point of the chapter, is that when practically lived out, it's just not true. If it was okay for this, specifically to this question, if we all lived by the way that we felt, this world would not be a very good place. If we're being honest with one another. I mean, in our better moments, sure, we love one another, we tolerate each other, we do things for one another. But a majority of the time, I mean, I wouldn't want to be ruled by my emotions. It just wouldn't be a pretty thing especially when you put 4 little kids in the mix. I mean, even now as we're talking, I hear my poor wife. She's outside with our 4 daughters, and I hear my youngest screaming at the top of her lungs, like in the middle of our cul-de-sac. I know exactly what's going on. You know, she didn't get the bike she wanted or something out of the garage. And it's just like, if I was ruled by my emotions, well, I wouldn't have probably 4 kids anymore. You know? But yeah, I think, but so when practically lived out, that it just doesn't leave with my brother or anybody else, you know. Being consistent matters. Certainly, what does Rabbi Zacharias says? He says you, even in India, you look both ways when you step off the curb,
Right.
You know, and it's like, it's not never a both and, it's always an either or.
Yeah.
World out there. And when we don't live, practically speaking, consistently with the way the world really is, we bump into it hard. Yeah. And sometimes those bumps have significant or serious consequences. That's so right. Eventually, my advice is, and what I do with my family and the people that I'm close to that I have an opportunity to do this with, is I really pay attention to how they live and what they say. And when the moment is right, not every time, but when the moment is right, I try to call them on it. Say, wait a second, I thought that you said being consistent doesn't matter, or, you know, morals are relative, or whatever the flavor is for that week. And just try to have a conversation with it and show them that no, it is important that we are consistent. You go to work every morning. I know your emotions don't allow for that every morning. So why do you go to work every morning when you don't want to? You know, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
my 2 cents.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, John. I think that question is a good one, but it's hard sometimes for us when we're seeing the question out of context. And if I was in a situation and I had no other context, I would just spend a little time just sitting down with them and asking them, like, what's going on, and like trying to find out more and just asking more questions and probing. Because like you said, John, people might talk that way, but they can't live that way. So there must be something else going on. And it could be that they're just trying to say that to avoid something else, some other truth point that you've made. So if it was me, I would just try to spend more time with that person so long as you can, like if they're a relative or a friend or a coworker, and just unpack where they are with life. You know, the whole Francis Schaeffer quote about spending, 55 minutes out of the hour asking them questions and finding out what's troubling their heart and their mind. That's what I would do in that case, because I would kind of be like, they might just be saying that to, as a smokescreen, but in reality, there's something else going on beyond that. And I would just probably try to spend some time figuring that out,
Yeah. And it's interesting sometimes, often, at least practically speaking in my life, the people who say that they live by their emotions, or they don't care about consistent living, are the first ones to call me inconsistent when I do something that they think is inconsistent with my world. So they're calling me on it, even though they don't adhere to it, which is always very interesting to me.
Well, that's you're a Christian, so you're a hypocrite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, people can talk this way, but they can't live this way, right? I mean, that's the thing with relativism. People can talk about relativism and how it's true, and people can say things it's okay. I'm okay with self-refuting things, but nobody can live that way. Like your example with Zacharias, who says that even in India, people look both ways before they cross the street, because that there's a truck coming or that there's not a truck coming are not something that you can just be okay with. Like this inconsistency, either one is true or the other is. And your life is literally based upon, which is it?
Yeah. I use that one all the time. He also says, I love it, where he says, in some cultures, they friend their neighbors. In other cultures, they eat their neighbors. Do you have a preference? It's like, oh yeah, I do have a preference. I prefer to be uneaten. So yeah, he comes up with the best stuff, man.
Yeah,
he's a good dude. Okay, you guys want to move on to? You know what? Let me ask you a question, because I wasn't sure if this fell into the category of practical suicide or not. This happened to me at an event. There was an atheist who sat front row, and I didn't know they were an atheist. They were. It was a Pentecostal-ish church, and charismatic church, and so I wasn't sure, because sometimes you get those people who are just like amen you the whole way through, right?
right.
And this person, but they were like shaking their head, and so it wasn't like an amen. It was like a, but
like, no,
anyways,
you're so wrong.
yeah, they stuck around afterwards. They got pretty upset during the Q&A time and stormed out, but then got the pastor turned them around, and they hung out, and we talked for about half an hour after an event. And at one point he said, we should believe things based on evidence, and faith is belief without evidence. Okay. And so he's telling me, you got to believe stuff based on evidence, and you, Christian, you have faith, which is without evidence. And so I asked him, what evidence does he have that biblical faith is belief without evidence? Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
And of course he was visibly like shocked that he even asked the question, like it was a no-brainer, like it was obvious. I said, no, like, give me an example. Show me where that's what the Bible teaches. And he was just completely tongue-tied at that moment. Maybe because he hadn't thought of it, maybe because that's just, he was used to people saying that that's what faith is. So I asked him, do you expect me to believe you without evidence? And so here's an example where he's claiming faith is belief without evidence, but as he's living, the kind of the practical side of it is that he expects me to just take his word without evidence. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so I don't know if it necessarily falls into the neat and tidy category of practical suicide, but there is kind of a practical suicide or something going on there. Would you agree?
That's what I was thinking at first. I was thinking I was going between sibling rivalry and practical suicide, but yeah,
I think it's practical.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say practical suicide, because he's asking, he's asking something of you that Alan's off again. That man needs a raise so he can get that next tier of internet service.
5G.
He needs to get the 5G out there. No, I'd say it's practical suicide.
Yeah,
he's asking you something that he's not willing to offer up. Yeah.
There seems to be. It's not merely an inconsistency between two views, like sibling rivalry. But anyways, let's go to chapter 12, and we'll wait. Alan will be back, I'm sure, in a minute here. Chapter 12 is about what's called sibling rivalry and infanticide. Again, there's kind of these words like infanticide that may trigger some people, because of course that has a meaning outside of how Greg's using it. But sibling rivalry is where he starts. Again, this is kind of it's a type of what Greg calls suicide, in that you have two objections, and when they're voiced together by the same person, they're actually at odds with each other. Okay, and so let me give you an example of one that happened to me. Okay,
examples are good.
And then, because this is a true story, I was going back and forth on Twitter, I think it was. And Alan says he'll be right back. I was on Twitter, and some atheists, I guess I posted something pro-life, and the pro-choicers kind of came out of the woodwork, okay? And this happens. I mean, you know how Twitter is. And this pro-choicer, they said something like, in fact, I took a screenshot of it. They said to me, Or did I? It was something like this was, well, I went back because I had written an article about it. So I just went and looked at the old article. And she had said, she complained about God, the God of the Old Testament, because of Noah and how he killed all these people in the flood. Okay. That was her complaint. What occurred to me, again, sibling rivalry, you have two beliefs, two objections, or two beliefs, and they're held in tension with each other, and you got to spot them. So what I did was she's this pro-choicer, and I knew she was pro-choice because her profile icon was like Planned Parenthood symbol. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And we had already kind of talked about the pro-life, pro-choice thing. Now she's complaining about God who killed everyone with the flood. So I started asking her a question. Like, well, I asked her, doesn't God as the creator, I know you don't believe in him, but wouldn't God, hypothetically, if he exists and is the creator of all things, wouldn't he have the right to take the life of his creatures? And so here's this girl now, she's kind of, I think, kind of caught, because she argues on the one hand that a woman should have the right to do whatever she wants with her own body. There's a creature inside of her, she can take the life of that. She can take the life of that being, right? But she says God does not have the right to take the life of a human being, right? Through the flood. And so here's I think an inconsistency in their view. If she was a consistent pro-choicer, she should be staying there saying, yes, and since God is the creator of life, he has the right to take any life he wants, right? So that was an example of sibling rivalry that I came across in my own dialogues. What about you guys?
Are we on chapter 12?
Yeah, we're on chapter 12. You keep disappearing.
Let me jump over there here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example. How did she respond? Did she?
That's a good question. I didn't write how it all ended in the article. This was back in 2016, so I don't recall.
Oh, you don't recall how it?
She didn't.
Like, I don't know if there's Anyways, I'm just trying to think. I'm thinking of the example, and because the objection is it's bodily rights.
Yeah.
So I am in charge of my own body, but as far as God, anyways, I was just thinking about it. That's a really interesting. I'd like to know how that conversation went. This is a hard tactic. This one, I think, is a little bit more complex. Then, what do you think about it, Alan?
Yeah, sibling rivalry. Is that what we're on?
Yeah.
I dropped out for minutes there. Yeah, what I was going to say was something that struck me on page 166, where Greg puts, he says, a fair-minded person will surrender at least one when you identify the problem. And I kind of circle that section where he says, a fair-minded person.
Yeah.
It's I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's not as common as I'd like it to be, where I find people who are fair-minded. Like even the next page on 167, he talks about this Hindu college student that he had a conversation with.
Yeah.
And then he points out how sibling rivalry happened in that situation. And then she smiles and says, oh yeah, touche, like you got me. I'm thinking, like, that's so uncommon that happens, And so all this to say, I'm trying to encourage people to temper their expectations, because not always do you find people who are reasonable. Not always do you find people who are necessarily even able to follow a logical progression of thoughts. And I'm not trying to be mean here, like, we're logical and smart, everyone else is stupid. No, even Christians and even myself oftentimes make logical mistakes or don't see something, But I think when you identify something as committing suicide and you point it out, you're not going to always get a reasonable person to be like, oh yeah, I agree, my point is totally self-defeating.
Yeah.
Anyways, that stood out. The other thing, though, that I really liked is on page 175, okay? And it's where he's talking about scientism and how scientism commits infanticide, which I've always known that scientism is self-defeating in a sense, right? Because it says that the only things that you can know that are true are determined with the scientific method.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of you who have ever heard of scientism being self-defeating and have struggled to be able to communicate how it's self-defeating to somebody, I encourage you to read this explanation or this illustration that Greg uses on page 174 and 175, where he talks about a truth box.
Yeah.
Or a box that has all knowledge in it, just truths in it. And he goes, before any alleged truth can go into the box, it has to first pass the scientific truth test. And he goes, the problem is that your knowledge project could never get started because some truths would need to be in the truth box first before science itself could even begin its analysis.
Yeah.
And I just, to me, when he explained that illustration, I thought, oh, this is such a great way to illustrate it. Because I think sometimes with self-defeating arguments, it's hard to identify them or even kind of wrap your mind around them. Because it's just hard sometimes for people to think of it. And so I think this illustration nicely captures it in a way that people can visualize it and then explain it better, or even understand it for yourselves. So that was like my favorite part of the whole chapter.
Yeah, I like that stuff too. I got nothing to add to that. Does Tim?
Yeah, no, that's good. He quoted C.S. Lewis at one point. That famous quote.
You can't.
My argument against God. What's that?
How do you judge a crooked line unless you know what it's
Yeah. And so
page 172.
Lewis, let me pull it up here.
On
172.
Yeah. Just above the
my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how I got this idea of just and unjust, a man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. And he's showing there's a couple of things going on. There's a sibling rivalry he talks about when you have problem of evil, relativism, right? Those two views can't go together. They're inconsistent. But then he goes even further and he talks about how
it's infanticide, right?
There's an infanticide that happens.
Yeah.
That you, and this is the idea when you have an objection, which he calls the child, and then that is dependent. This child is completely dependent on a prior notion, which is the parent. Okay, yeah. And what you do is you show that the parent, if the parent doesn't, that part doesn't make sense, then you end up destroying the child. So, for example, if the parent is God as a standard of right and wrong, then you're going to end up destroying the problem of evil, right? To argue against God,
right? Because
you needed God in the first place. He does the same thing with determinism. He says, look at the parent determinism, which many materialistic atheists hold to, destroys the child, which is the argument for determinism. People use arguments that give their reasons for why the universe is completely determined, dominoes falling. Well, you end up killing the child, destroying the child, if determinism is true. So this was a harder chapter, I think, to follow and actually put into practice for all the reasons you guys have laid out, because you often don't see it. If someone says, my brother is an only child, you immediately get it, right. Hey, something's wrong with that. Doesn't make sense. But when you get some of these others, like this whole infanticide sibling rivalry thing, those are hard to spot. And so we need to keep studying, I think, And because obviously a guy like Greg, he didn't come out of the womb knowing this stuff, but he did eventually. He was able to spot it eventually, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so where does that come from? Well, I think Greg, obviously, he's gifted in a lot of different ways. But I think that if we work hard at this stuff, I think we'll be able to identify these things too. Yeah. And I think many of these things, as Greg has already pointed out, weren't things he necessarily was able to respond to in the moment, but was after the fact. He walks away from the conversation. The wheels are still spinning.
Yeah.
He's practicing this stuff out. What's a better way to respond? Hey, maybe. And there's the infanticide thing comes up. Or, you know what, that view that they held, hey, that is inconsistent with that other view. Maybe I should have pointed that out.
Yeah.
And so when you're on the radio for 30 years and you're talking with people who have different views, right?
Right.
Eventually you're going to work some of these things out. And I think that,
and like, I like what you just said, he's had so much time to kind of reflect and put the stuff in the book. One of the things I really like about the book is it's kind of the opposite, where I'm reading it and then all of these examples that have happened in the past come to my mind of when this stuff happens, and now it's a matter of trying to learn the material and be kind of a little bit quicker on our feet. And I remember specifically, I really, in this section, enjoyed his bowling. He calls the titles are so funny. Bowling and badness, bowling referring to having a standard, a score, if I remember correctly, and badness, the problem of evil. And I remember when I was, as an atheist, right on the verge of becoming a Christian, I was living in Hollywood and just really, I was really living like hell. I had a job that paid me pretty well. I was living at basically Hollywood and Highland. Hollywood and Melrose, which is a block's just away from Highland. And I remembered that, and this didn't become clear to me until I heard, oh man, how do you say his last name? Bignon, French atheist, now Christian.
Guillaume Bignon. Yeah.
He said it, and it hit home with me because at a certain point, God reactivated my conscience. And when he does that, it really hurt a lot, because you realize that what you're doing isn't true. And related to this chapter is I all of a sudden, the things that I was doing and pursuing and the relationships that I had and my goals, even my goals in life, all of a sudden they just didn't fit reality anymore. And it wasn't reality that I could alter, but it was my world that I could alter. And when that happens, I remember it hurting a lot. And at that point I said, well, okay. And then I started wrestling intellectually with this stuff and coming to the conclusion that there had to be this standard that I otherwise thought wasn't there anymore. Like I didn't think it was there. And I used to argue against it. And then all of a sudden, God, I don't know what he did. Like what Beyond says, he reactivated my conscience.
Right.
And I remember just sitting in my apartment and I lived in a duplex in Hollywood and just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like literally like, Zoolander when he's staring at the puddle, like, who am I? I had a Zoolander moment where I'm just like, oh my gosh, the world does not make sense anymore. And like, I just realized that my worldview was committing suicide. I mean, it was dead. It was literally dead. And then it took a couple more months from there of anguish. But anyways, I just thought like that was my personal example. When I read this stuff, it's so cool that I can lay it over top of my personal experiences that have already happened with the hopes of being able to use it in some situations moving forward with folks. It was good.
Yeah.
So this question came up in the chat. Are people guilty of suicide who are pro-life but are in favor of the death penalty? So is that an example of sibling rivalry? Certainly that's the claim, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
we're inconsistent.
Yeah. And I would say it's a fairly common claim.
Yeah.
By people, whenever, at least when I teach on pro-life stuff, I hear that as an objection from people who disagree. And I think the only similarity between abortion and capital punishment is that in both cases you end up with a dead body. But there's a significant difference, and that is the guilt or the innocence of the person who is killed. So the reason why this is not self-defeating from the pro-life perspective to be pro-life when it comes to the subject of abortion, but be pro-capital punishment, assuming you are pro-capital punishment, is that in the case of abortion, why you're opposed to that death is because this is an innocent human being. But if you're in favor of capital punishment, it's because you believe that people who are guilty deserve to be punished. Now, we can argue about what should that punishment be, but the reality is that these are very different cases because one is innocent and one is guilty. So that's why you can't really compare the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good word.
Good word.
It's a good word.
I haven't been in church in a while, so I'm not used to the Christian man. I gotta work my way back.
I love how Patty was real here. She says the best responses are always the one I think of when the conversation is over. He's not alone.
You're not alone, Patty. And you know what? Greg says the same thing. He often admits to us. He'll be like, "Oh, I should have said this." He goes, "I thought of this response afterwards." So even Greg, the master of tactics, says the same thing as you do. So be encouraged or discouraged, I guess. I don't know.
Continue on, and you're just
you have no chance if Greg meant. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's encouraging because I do the same thing, but then I hear Greg say, "Oh yeah, I wish I had said that," and I'm like, "Oh, you mean you don't always think of the best thing right at the moment either?" Oh. That's encouraging to me. Be encouraged.
So we're getting near the top of the hour. I don't know if we have any. Did you guys see any questions that we missed?
Is God so powerful he could make a rock? He could not.
Actually, that one came up, and there was a response to it.
No. Oh,
did you guys
he's
see
just
that
making
one?
it up.
No, but there was Meg had just a really good comment, and I would just agree with the comment. I guess it was from Got Questions, gave the answer, a rock would have to be infinitely large to defeat an infinite amount of lifting power. But an infinite rock is a contradiction since material objects can't be infinite. Only God is infinite. There cannot be two infinites. And it says, so the question is actually asking if God can make a contradiction, which he cannot. And so that's how God answers.
That sounds like an Amy Hall answer.
Yeah.
For
Amy
sure.
Hall probably wrote that.
For sure.
But that, we would totally agree with that. I think what Greg tried to do, though, in responding this in the way he did, was just like to avoid, talking about how many infinities and all this other stuff, but you can get right down to what is this question really asking? It's putting God's power against God's power, right?
Right.
Which is, when you think of it, just replace God and put another human being, and can you beat yourself up? Can you beat yourself in an arm wrestle? This kind of thing.
I don't know, Tim. Can you beat yourself in an arm wrestling match?
I could destroy myself in an arm wrestling match.
And then are you the winner or the loser?
That's the question. I'm an optimist, so I'd give myself the victory. Yeah, I think we're good on the question front. Do you guys have any final parting salvos?
A salvo? Wow. Is this war, Tim? Are these tactics for war? Is that what we're learning here?
Jesus loves you.
Jesus. No, but the reality is that the Bible uses war metaphors to describe what's happening. But of course, as 2 Corinthians talks about, this is not physical war. It's spiritual warfare,
Yeah, I'm struck by the number of times the war illustration is used in the New Testament. And I have friends on Facebook who, when I just use the title tactics, they get worked up because they think, oh, you're just stirring up quarrels, or you just want fights. That's not what this is about. And I'm surprised. couple people on my Facebook. They've been on there for years. They know what we do, and they're familiar with the New Testament. So this to me does not make any sense.
Right. Greg just 3 days ago tweeted this: spiritual warfare in the Bible is not so much a power encounter as a truth encounter. That's why the first piece of our spiritual armor are the chief weapon in our spiritual battles is the belt of truth. We prevail in spiritual combat by shining God's light on the devil's lies. So there he's making a distinction, or he's trying to say spiritual warfare isn't just, the whole casting out demons and so on and so forth. It's battling false ideas that are raised up against the knowledge of God.
Yeah.
And then 2 days ago, and this is relevant to what we're talking about here, he tweeted, "We are at war with the powers of darkness in a spiritual battle where the violence occurs in an unseen realm, but the casualties happen here in the visible world." Oh, that was really great. Because it's true.
Yeah. That's right.
It is warfare in every sense of the word. I mean, in a very real sense of the word.
Yeah.
But it's spiritual warfare, but the casualties happen in the physical world, the visible world.
Yeah. And Ryan, he must be a STR follower because he made that connection too. So looks like man, it's so great to have all you guys on the chat. Ron says, look forward to Sunday evenings because of these discussions. Thanks. I mean, that's really very sweet. Victor says he wants to apply for a job at STR, but apparently they only hire hunky guys. Hey, I'll take that. Compliment,
I have to get.
I don't know.
Here. He can talk to her.
Yeah.
I think John's the only
hunky I am.
I think John's the only hunky guy here, right? Aren't Tim and I? Aren't we the sort of the tall,
lanky?
Lanky. That's chunky. That's chunky, Alan. I'm the only chunky guy here.
He said hunky. I think he was right.
So we just want to, before we close here, just remind everyone that the reason we're doing this is because we want to be here for you guys. We're doing our best in quarantine to still have an impact. And man, I don't know about you two, but I have been busier through this quarantine and self-isolation with work than when we were traveling every week. There's just been so much to do.
It's a different kind of busy. That's
right. I'm really excited next week. Not only is it my birthday on Wednesday and my wife's birthday on Tuesday.
Wow.
My daughter's birthday today.
No way. This is a good week, my friend. And on Wednesday, we're going to be launching Red Pen Logic. So that's going to be coming out on Wednesday. Really excited about that. A lot of prep and planning and everything went into that as well. We have other live streams. I think Greg is going live tomorrow night.
Yeah, tomorrow. That's right.
So if you guys are watching this, just know that tomorrow night he's going to be talking about the safety of tactics, which is really cool. An idea that he's been thinking about.
5 reasons tactics is safe or something. It's crazy.
Yeah, so it will keep you safe. And Alan, are you still going with your hermeneutics class?
Yeah. So every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I do a thing called How to Interpret Your Bible During a Pandemic.
Yeah.
So you called it hermeneutics, but it's just basically I'm teaching basic principles of biblical interpretation and then applying them to passages I've run across in my teaching or I've read in articles or heard in sermons. So I take the interpretive principle and then apply it to a biblical text, and we kind of unpack it. So it's the stuff that I love the most. It's just so much fun stuff because it's so practical, it's so easy, it's so relevant to every believer who reads the Bible, because we're all going to read the Bible between now and the day we die. Might as well figure out how to interpret it properly.
So that's so good.
Show me
how many weeks are you in?
We've done it all April, and I'm going to do it all May, I think. I was just scheduled for the rest of May. So I'm doing at least another 5 more weeks. So
Wow.
they're just short episodes. They're just like 20, 30-minute episodes where I just kind of bring up a principle and then apply it to some passage. So it's great.
So people can check that out on the Facebook page. Cool. John, are you going live this week? It seems like you just randomly will just hop on.
I was doing I forget what night of the week, Mondays, I think. But then last Monday and then this Monday, I think Greg hopped on. And Greg's my boss. So, and he also comes over my house to go live.
Yeah, that's true. So you can't go live when he goes live because he's using.
So when he goes live, and actually, I'd rather hear from Greg, to be honest with you.
Just live bomb him, like, kind of be in the background, and like, instead of photo bomb, it's live bomb. I don't know.
Every once in a while, he'll give me a shout out. I sit in the chair over in the corner just in case something goes wrong, and he'll be like, "Oh yeah, I'm with John." I don't mind. I love it. I love it. Anytime I get a chance to hear Greg talk, it's just always so much wisdom. Tim, you did a fantastic job with him late last week. Was that Friday night?
Thursday night.
They all run together for me now.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But it's like you guys, I thought, did a fantastic job talking about the problem of evil and COVID-19. And
well, man, Greg is. Yeah, I still have to go back and watch.
That thing should have been like 3 hours.
Well, we wanted to keep it. I think when people, this is me anyways. If I see a video and it says 3 hours, sometimes I won't even open it because I know I don't have 3 hours to watch the video. If I see something that's like half hour, 45, or I look at what's going on. Okay, I want to complete this task. I don't want to start it and not finish it.
Yeah.
So, but hey, maybe me and you will hop on this week and just do Q&A or something.
Let's do it.
Cool, man.
Let's do it.
Not on my birthday though.
Not on your birthday. Yeah, I need to get going. We're about to.
And not on your wife's birthday either.
Yeah. So later in the week. All right, cool. Thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah,
and we'll see you. 2 more weeks left, and we'll finish the book, and we'll start a new book.
I have the book. I know what book we need to do next, but I'm not going to tell you.
Okay, it'll be a surprise.
Yeah, it's a good book.
All right, take care, guys.
Bye.